Before we get started on building our values that will drive our goals, I'm going to touch on a couple of the reasons why people fail when they set goals. Now, there's usually one of three things that we find when people fail at setting their goals. Now, the first one is impulse-led goal setting. So they might be on social media, or they might be given an idea, or a marketer might grab their attention and give them a nice, big, audacious goal that someone can chase. Now, this is often followed by a lack of execution because it simply doesn't align with their values. The second is poor planning. Now, poor planning after you've set your goal is a surefire way of not succeeding, because we set this amazing goal, we have every intention to achieve, but we don't set the plan or the micro steps to get there in the long term. And the third one, which is the most common, going too big too soon. We simply plan a goal that's too big for our current stage of life or ability, and therefore we fail by not getting close to achieving it. Now, it's probably a really good time to touch on something that might have a big impact as to why you don't achieve your goals, and that's social media. It's pretty ironic now that I'm marketing this to you or giving this to you probably through a social media channel or a platform, but social media is designed for one reason, and that is to keep your attention, to keep you coming back to an app, to keep you using it, or to simply take you away from your key tasks in your day to allow you to execute on what really drives you. Now, this is a little principle that they use time and time again with habit looping called the dopamine release. By getting a like on a post, by getting a comment on a post, it drags you back into the app and releases a small amount of dopamine that gives you that good feeling that keeps you returning, and you start to crave and want it on a regular basis. Now, the funny thing is, dopamine can also be released by numerous other ways, like fitness, going outside for a walk or getting some sunshine, and laughing. So by these social media apps being built around habit looping psychology, they're taking you away and giving you that easier dopamine hit so you don't have to work as hard to feel good. So keep that in mind when you start to set goals, you feel like your progress is stagnating, or you feel like you're getting distracted and find yourself scrolling through someone else's social media profile to avoid doing the hard things you want to do. Now, it's time to set our values. It might seem counterintuitive, but our values drive our goals. And the reason for that is if we pick a goal that isn't in alignment with our values, we then find the struggle or the lack of motivation to achieve them. Not many people think about the values and the things that mean a lot to them that drive their daily lives. So it's important to pull apart your life, what you value in it, and how you want to conduct yourself in order to pick a goal that suits you. Be grateful, be useful, and be consistent. Now, having these three cornerstone values allows me to align my personal and business life in a way that I want to conduct myself and helps me achieve the things I want to achieve. So now it's probably time for you to think about the values that you want to live your life by and set your goals by in order to have a bit more clarity into understanding why you want to achieve them. Once we've had time to consolidate our values and picked a few key values that we're going to drive our decision making with, we need to consider three elements of our life, and that is health, wealth, and relationships. Now, if we work in a 3 pillars strategy, it allows us to identify and go through each of those pillars and identify elements of our lives that we're not quite happy with or things we need to change. And looking at those 3 pillars, we might find a pillar that we need to address that needs immediate attention, and we shouldn't be setting goals in other pillars that are going to take away from that. The analogy I'd like to use is we don't go out and talk to the neighbour if the kitchen's on fire. So making sure you have a really good bead on the health, wealth, and relationships part of your life will allow you to set goals that are appropriate for the time in your life that will allow you to achieve them. Another point we really need to touch on is our own brain and the decisions we make and the things that trick us into planning poor goals or picking the wrong goal. And that is heuristics, biases, and blind spots. Now, it's really important to understand the key concepts of these, and you can dig into these individually if you want to learn more about them, but heuristics is the way we think. It's our cognitive process that gets us to make a decision. And inherently, we're lazy. We love to shortcut processes, and it's also part of a deep-seated survival mechanism that helps us to stay out of trouble. So heuristics and the way our brain works causes that cognitive decision-making process, and then as we're fatigued or we're lazy, we shortcut the process and sometimes pay off really important sections of our decision-making process because we simply want to get to the finish. The next one is biases, and we all have them. Knowing what biases are present and how they're affecting our decision-making is super important because they're going to lead us astray. A couple we can mention is a confirmation bias, and that's when we seek out data that supports our decision. Maybe we want to set a goal that's actually counterintuitive to what we want to achieve, or it's different from the way we've operated previously. Our confirmation bias is going to find the bits of information that want to stop us from making that goal a reality or steer us away from it. So it's an important one to miss. The next one's a recency bias. Have you had a bad experience around the goal you want to achieve, or if something happened recently in your life that's going to affect that decision to want to pursue the goal or plan it appropriately? Being cognizant of what your recency bias is telling you, whether it's a positive experience or a poor experience, is a really important way to make sure that you're not letting past experiences really derail your progress. The third consideration is our blind spots. Now, the easiest way to avoid our blind spots is to socialize our goals and targets with others. We all have blind spots, and they're created for us to avoid doing the hard things or to support our decisions to allow us to pursue a goal that might not be necessarily correct for us. So being aware of your blind spots and knowing what your weaknesses are is super important to allow you to bring the right people into your life to socialize the problem or the goal to allow you to pick the right one and set off on the right path. So now that we've set our values, it's time to choose our goal. Now, the goal you originally turned up with might not now be the goal you want to pursue. So it's really important to understand that health, wealth, and relationships model to know what this goal is that you want to pursue so you've got the right one to kick off on the right foot with. Now, your goals should equal your values plus your motivators. Notice I said motivators, not motivation. There's a big difference, which we'll go into later, times by your planning. Now, that framework should then form consistency. Because you've aligned it to something that aligns with you and your values, you've also put the right motivators in place to allow you to achieve them, and then your planning should overlap the entire process, which will allow you to follow on and execute day in, day out. This will breed consistency, which will then form into discipline. Now, a common problem with what we see from day to day is you have people telling you need to be more disciplined. This is further from the case. Now, what we should be looking for is aiming for micro habits and being consistent over the long term, which will allow micro habits to form, and then that will form discipline once you can repeat this day in, day out repeatedly with minimal stress or thought process. So removing that big jump and breaking it down into smaller jumps is a super important factor to achieving success. Now, once you've picked your goal, it's important to understand what part of the journey you're on. And we're going to use the trans-theoretical model for change to help you identify that. Now, there's a few stages to the trans-theoretical model for change, and the first is pre-contemplation. Pre-contemplation can be described as you've thought about it, or you're not even aware of this just yet, but you don't really pay much attention to it. It's really just a thought in the back of your mind, and it hasn't come to the front of your mind or given you much thought, or you haven't paid much thought to it. The next is the contemplation stage, where you start to have that goal or idea come to the front of your mind a little bit more, and you start paying serious attention to it, thinking what your life might be like once you achieve your goal, or thinking about the plan of how to get there. The next stage is preparation. This is where you start working out the map to get from point A to point B. Now, this could be basic preparation. This is probably where you are with this goal right now. And this is where you start putting the pieces of the puzzle in, or the roadmap towards success. Next comes action. Action is where we start to step off on the journey. We may not have the plan fully worked out. We may not have all the information that we need at this present point, but we start progressing towards the goal. This is often where we realize the goal is a little bit further away than what we anticipated, and we start to falter, or we might even need to replan our goal and add the extra bits of accountability or our motivators back in to make sure we can consistently move towards it in the time frame we've given ourselves. The next stage is maintenance. This is where you've acquired the habit or you've achieved the goal, and it's all about keeping that as a constant feature in your life. Now, ensuring that you have the habit small enough, or it means enough to you, i.e. its importance allows you to achieve it every day, is super important to maintaining it for the long term. Now, at any stage of this process, you might hit failure or relapse. So you could be in pre-contemplation, where you're not even really aware of it, and you just relapse back into your old habits. But at any stage along this journey, you could hit failure or relapse. And the tips I could give you here is making sure you've got that habit loop that allows you to fail and quickly jump back on the bandwagon as soon as possible to allow you to keep achieving the goal or readjust where appropriate. Okay, so we've covered the trans-theoretical model for change. And in relation to your goal, you might now know where you sit on that journey. Now, it's important to go no further until you've gone past that contemplation phase and you're ready to start planning. Reason being is because if we start from here, we haven't put enough things in place to allow us to stay motivated or accountable along the journey. We talk in terms of intrinsic and extrinsic accountability, or motivators. Now, these things are very important to plan around our goals and our structure, because we can use external influences or internal motivators to drive us towards a goal. And knowing what type of leverage we have on both sides will allow us to plan effectively. Now, a quick note here, you should be aiming for a goal that is intrinsically motivating towards you, because the more intrinsic motivation, which we'll cover the points of intrinsic motivation shortly, the more it is intrinsically motivating, the more likely you are to achieve it, because you don't require outside influences to keep you pursuing your goals. So when we talk about intrinsic motivation, this is usually within our circle of influence, or the things we can control to drive us along the journey. Extrinsic are things we can bolt on, like accountability from friends, communities, or rewards and prizes that allow us to stay motivated along the journey, but they sometimes cease to be motivating when we realize that it isn't actually something we're interested in. So let's cover off on the extrinsic types of motivation. The first one we have is community. Now, that can be your battle buddy, a friend, a group that keeps you motivated along the journey. They usually have similar goals and they're heading in the same direction as you. The next one's monetary, and this is where the coach aspect comes in. So you're paying someone for a service or paying for a service, and you feel obliged to complete it because you've simply shelled out the money to do so. The next one's competition. If you're a competitive person, say if we sign up for a race, you're more likely to achieve a goal because you have friendly or healthy competition to allow you to drive you towards your goal. That's also associated with money, rewards, and prizes. Do you get a sense of satisfaction for the goal if someone is going to hand you an award at the end of it? This is still an intrinsic motivator, however, because sometimes when we get to the end of the goal, we don't feel as quite fulfilled, even though we receive that prize or reward at the end of it. The final two are status and fear. Are we chasing a goal for that title or the way people perceive us? Now, this is an extrinsic motivator that we need to be careful of, because other people's perceptions of us should not matter to the way we feel about ourselves or the way we drive our goals. The final one is fear. Extrinsically motivated to achieve a goal through fear is a dangerous place to be. It sets off all sorts of emotional reactions or reactivity towards the goal, and is sometimes a really easy way to become derailed when you become overly emotional or you're triggered by certain events when on the journey towards your goal. Next up, we have intrinsic motivators. Now, these are the ones we should be planning our goals around, and we should be selecting a goal that sparks that interest within ourselves. The first type of intrinsic motivation is sense of achievement or purpose. This is probably the most important one I would press you to have a goal aligned to, because if we have a goal that drives our purpose in alignment with our values, this can keep us on the path for an extended period of time because we cease to need external motivation to get where we need to go. The next intrinsic motivators are enjoyment and fun. These are super important to keep you on the long haul when going towards your goal. How many times have we achieved our goal with relative ease when we're actually having fun doing it? Enjoying the journey is a key aspect and a motivator that we try and keep in every goal planning element. The next is curiosity and personal growth. If you're that personal growth type of individual and you love to take on challenges that allow you to feel like you've grown personally, professionally, or emotionally, anything like that by the end of the goal, this is a great motivator that you can have intrinsically tied into any goal that you want to achieve. The final one is pain or removal of pain. Now, this is kind of like fear. People often use this motivator when they're faced with a fork in the road in their life or some news that isn't desirable, something like a health-related issue, and they use the pain of what they're feeling to drive them out of the hole towards a healthier, happier goal. Now, this can have a really negative effect on the body and the mind, as we mentioned that element of emotion when we're planning our goals or driving us towards them. So using pain as a motivator can sometimes get us moving, but isn't something we want to maintain long-term for our own health and mental well-being. So we've covered the types of motivators we can use, and it's all in terms of momentum. Now, momentum towards our goal is super important, as you might not start off with much, or it might become stagnant throughout the journey, but gaining momentum by using these motivators to push you along the journey is super important. Also, using the extrinsic motivations to avoid partitioning, i.e., we don't tell people about our goals because if we fail, if no one knows about it, that's okay. No one knew about it, it's like it never occurred. If we find ourselves partitioning towards a goal or segmenting who we tell or the motivators we use, it's probably a really good indication that it's not the right goal we want to achieve, or we're super reluctant because it's a big jump and we might want to take a smaller bite-sized goal to form those micro habits to achieve it. We've covered the motivators, and we've also covered off on the momentum and partitioning towards a goal, but now it's time to learn a really simple framework when planning a goal, and that's the SMART framework. It's pretty commonly used, but it's a super effective way of writing down a goal and having actionable takeaway points that you can start to implement on your planning process. And now in that SMART process, we use specificity. Being super specific towards the goal you want to plan is important. Simply saying, I want to run a marathon or I want to lose X amount of weight doesn't cut it. We need to make sure it's specific with numbers and metrics that we can track. The next one is measurable. Like we just said, we need something we can measure along the journey, not just at the completion of the journey, to know we're heading in the right direction. And if we find we're on the wrong goal or we need to pivot, we've got enough data there to help us make educated decisions. The next one's attainable. We talked about shooting too big too soon or taking those big jumps when it's simply not attainable for us to go for just due to where we are in our lives or the type of goal we want to go for. So picking something small enough that's achievable alleviates some of that stress and that reluctance to get going. The next part is relevant. Is this goal relevant to us? Now, we've started this whole masterclass talking about values, goal setting, biases, heuristics, blind spots. We've given you a whole heap of tools to assess whether the goal is relevant to you. And if the goal isn't, once you dig into those motivators and once you look at the health, wealth, and relationships of your life, maybe it isn't the right thing to choose. So we just simply go back to the drawing board. We pick a goal that's relevant to us. The final one is time bound. By adding a time or a delivery date to our goal, It also adds importance and a sense of urgency around the goal. If we simply leave it open-ended, we're not going to achieve it. We're not going to prioritize it in our life. And when we go through the goal setting formula and structure, you'll see why we need to add a time, because it tracks back towards our daily action points that allows us to take those tiny steps to achieve that goal. So now that we've looked at the motivators and the accountability structures we can leverage to keep our momentum toward a goal, it's now time to start to build those micro habits. And we're going to use a simple 1-3 goal setting formula. That's one goal with 3 daily action points underneath it. Now, I don't want you to think about any more than 3 points at this stage. What this does to us is allows us to prioritize the most important things that must occur on a daily basis for us to achieve the goal. If we start adding extra things in the periphery, it's where we get lost and have too many things to achieve. So start with 3, pick the most high value things we can do and go with those on a daily basis. Once we've chosen our 3 action points we need to achieve on a daily basis, that allows us to bridge the gap between start and end using a project timeline. Maybe those 3 things that you're choosing to do daily will only get you so far and you need to pivot and adjust in order to get you to the end goal. That's okay. What we want to do is look at start and finish and start to bridge that gap in between to allow us to build a project timeline and then highlight any particular roadblocks or speed bumps that we may encounter. Now we've got our action points and we've started to look at our project plan or timeline to get to our goal, we need to understand at what stage of the change journey we're on in relation to our habit or goal. Now there's 4 C's I want you to consider and align yourself with what part of the change journey you're on. The first stage is context. Context is the elementary or beginning stage where we're simply learning about the subject, the goal, or the habit we want to achieve. So that improves our understanding and our likelihood of progressing to the next stage. The next stage is competence. It's when we start to do those daily habits or micro habits that allows us to progress closer to our goal. There's still apprehension there, but we can achieve them day in, day out, or we may fall off for a couple of days at a time, but we generally jump back on the bandwagon and we continue on. The next stage is confidence. This is where we start to gain that real momentum towards our goal. We understand why we're heading towards it. We've allocated our accountability structures to help head off any segues we might take to take us away from the goal, but we're feeling confident that we can achieve our goal. The final stage is capacity. This is where the habit or the goal has become a regular part of our life and we can continually just do it with minimal fuss or thinking. And that ties into cognitive load, which we'll go into later. Now, once we hit capacity, this is a point where we can start to look at picking up other habits or removing one of our 3 things that we're doing daily in order to pick up a new habit to take us to the next goal. Or if that is a long-term goal we want to achieve, we add the next phase of that timeline in. Now, when we talk about these micro habits, I want to touch on a simple thing we can actually check using our own personal devices, and that's called our attention span. In the settings in your device, you'll be able to see how many minutes it takes between you picking up your phone. Now, understanding what your attention span is actually a really easy way to know how small those micro habits need to be on a daily basis for you to achieve them. If we pick a goal that's going to take 30 to 60 minutes a day to achieve, but our attention span is 10 to 15 minutes between the times we pick up our phone, we are probably going to encounter times where we get distracted or disrupted, or we go back to that safe zone to get that dopamine hit on our smart device because it's easier than going out and doing our action point. Okay, so we've got our action points and we're heading towards our goal. We know what our attention span is, and we've actually started to plan a pretty effective little timeline when it comes towards the map or the journey. A simple concept I want to show you now is a military concept, and it's called the OODA Loop. Now, the OODA Loop is used to make good decisions after we take some time to assess and evaluate a situation. You might find with your daily action points or your attention span, you might get distracted or avoid doing the things you need to do to take you towards the goal. And this is all pretty normal. We get bored or we get apprehensive or anything like that, particularly if we're using fear or pain as a motivator. We find ourselves in a position of paralysis usually, and we are reluctant to get started or undertake the task, yet we know we need to do it. So we can use the OODA Loop, which is observe, orientate, decide, and act, to get us to where we need to go. So with the observe phase, we simply sit. We sit with our actions, our thoughts, our feelings, and we understand why we're feeling this way or why we're doing what we're doing. The next, we orientate on the problem and the root cause of the issue. Now we can use a simple method called a causal analysis, which allows us to drill down and find the problem that is actually causing the issue. Now that's simply by asking 5 whys or 5 questions. We drill down using 5 questions to go down a deeper layer each time to get to the root cause of why we're doing what we're doing. We can use that in the orientate phase to gain a better understanding and situational awareness of why we're doing the destructive things we are doing to take us off the path of achieving our goal. The next stage is decide. Deciding what we're going to do about it. We can use a simple strategy called the if then do this cue, which allows us to understand if we find this trigger, we then go and do this action to negate the process, to continue on along the journey. And we decide what habits or accountability structures we need to put in place to derail that destructive behavior or the non-essential behavior to allow us to keep moving. Once we've decided on what we're going to do, it's then act. Once we have the plan, it's simply coming down to us repeating that plan as many times as we need to make sure that new habit overrides the old habit. Now, a word with that, when we're in our acting phase, this may take some time to override our previous learnt behavior. And that's a principle called first learnt behavior response. Our deepest and most ingrained responses have been with us since our childhood, maybe even before we were born, or given to us through our adult lives, or particular events where they've caused trauma or they've had a significant effect on us. So reverting to first learnt behavior is perfectly natural. Have you ever started out to progress towards a goal, or you've had an idea in your head and you find yourself going back to the old destructive behaviors that you always do? This is reverting to first learnt behavior or first learnt response. And it's actually pretty normal. It's kept us safe for thousands of years as a survival mechanism, and it's actually a very important part of our biology. But a quick note, you can't actually unlearn a behavior. So you have to outlearn the behavior. And by practicing this OODA Loop and then our micro habits and getting back on the horse as quick as possible, time and time again, we'll slowly outlearn that old behavior and establish the new response. Depending on how long this behavior has been with you though, it could be weeks, months, or years until you actually break free of it. So take it easy. When you do find these self-destructive habits, go on your OODA Loop and keep repeating the process until you outlearn the old response with the desired response that you want to keep in your life. A simple way of helping bridge to success with our OODA Loop or our new habit is bridging. Bridging is used when we get an old habit or a similar habit to the one we want to attain, and we make the gap as small as possible to achieving that new habit. So if we bridge our habit of going to the gym in the morning or getting up at 5 o'clock, we can do things like laying our clothes out on our bed, setting an alarm clock, having a battle buddy or a training partner waiting at the gym for us to bridge that accountability. And we will then find that bridge or the gap between getting up early and going to the gym becomes shorter because you've put the accountability structure around it to allow you to achieve it. Now, bridging can also occur when you have a less desirable response using that OODA Loop. So if you find yourself doing it, you can create your if then do this cue, which allows you to bridge into the new habit. But bridging is super useful if we have some parts of an already desirable response or habit that we want to achieve, to then jump and make that next evolution into the full habit or the new response. Now, we've mentioned it a few times, and it's a principle called cognitive load or fatigue. Now, we all suffer cognitive load or fatigue. Have you ever been the one in a busy work environment that makes lots of decisions, and then you get to the end of the day and all you want to do is sit on the couch, watch Netflix, and binge eat? Now, this has come from our brain being simply tapped out of decision-making ability. Now, it's important to know when we're suffering cognitive load or fatigue to then negate that by having certain parts of our lives automated or outsourced, like cooking, cleaning, and things like that, to reduce the stress and make our decisions towards our desirable response more achievable. So the ways we get out of that cognitive load or avoid that cognitive load or fatigue, which we've already touched on about automating or outsourcing portions of your life that are non-essential to achieving your goal. We can also layer that accountability structure, like I mentioned, training partners or the community, those extrinsic factors that will pull us out of that cognitive load or fatigue, or simply make us avoid the decision because it's already been made for us. Now, when we have parts of our goal setting structured in this manner, we can focus on those 3 daily action points, and it'll be far more likely for us to achieve them. So far, we've covered a lot of ground, and if you're feeling a little overwhelmed, that's okay. We've got our plan, and we've got our values, our goal, our accountability structure, and our if then and do this cues, the OODA Loop, and everything we need to keep us on track and to plan our goals. But now it's time to actually put this stuff down in an actionable timeline or project in order for us to achieve it. An important part of building your journey is to add the testing milestones throughout. If you simply test at the start and the finish of a program, you're leaving yourself up to guesswork all the way in between. So when you're planning your journey, you've got your habits, your daily action points, make sure you schedule some routine testing points along the way to make sure you are indeed heading in the right direction. Now, by adding the testing component as well in the middle of the journey, that will also continue to add that sense of urgency. By having a timeline or a deadline you need to achieve a certain level or a certain outcome on testing, this adds the importance towards the goal. Once we build our testing and our timeline and we have that sense of urgency to get us off on the journey, weekly, we want to be conducting what's called an AAR, or after action review. We sit down with ourselves and our accountability buddy, if we have one, and we go through 3 simple questions. What did I do well? We highlight the wins and the things we did well throughout the week. We should be making an emphasis on celebrating those wins in a way, or appreciating how far we've come. Now, we all have this thing called a negativity bias. Now, this lives deep inside us, and we have this natural ability to focus on the negative things we're doing more so than the positive. So emphasizing the what I did well section and celebrating those wins or acknowledging them is super important. The next question is, what didn't I do well? This is where we need to be transparent with ourselves or the other people in the group, and we need to be honest and open with what we didn't do well. But what I want you to do here is only pick 1 to 3 points. The reason being is that negativity bias will allow you to just keep picking more and more about yourself that you didn't like, and it will make you focus unnecessarily on the negative. Now, from those 1 to 3 points, I would personally only pick one thing. I would take them to the next question, being, what can I do better? Now, that question, we take our follow-up action points and we take them into the next week to action and improve on. By only having 1 point to improve on, this reduces that cognitive load or fatigue and takes that negativity bias out of the equation. This takes us on to the next stage, which we can use during our AAR, which is journaling and diarising what we're learning. Ensuring that we're recording accurate representations of what we're finding is important. Reason being is because we can review 6, 8, 12 months or weeks down the track, where we can look back, we'll get a really good snapshot on how far we've come and what we did when we succeed or when we fail. Now, this review process helps us continually improve along the journey. The final 2 points I want to leave you with are little things that will help go a long way. The first principle is put first things first. Now, we mentioned having a diary and mapping your week because this is a really good way to make sure your routine suits where you want to head. Now, the importance of having those 3 daily action points, you want to put them in your diary as the first things you address and you don't compromise on them. Whether it's a work-related task, a home-related task, or a personal task, you need to make sure they're in your diary, you've committed to them, and you don't change the plan for anyone. I know things come up in life, but making sure you plan those first and keeping those important things at the front of your mind will make you more likely to achieve them. The final concept is skin in the game. This is an important way we can use other people or external elements to drive a result. Now, this can be the exchange of money or time with someone else in order to keep you accountable. If those extrinsic motivators aren't leveraging you to achieve it, that monetary element or that community or accountability buddy element is the key metric you need to focus on. By giving your responsibility away to someone else, by giving money for time or time to another person, you're giving yourself skin in the game to keep you on the journey.